Liverpool, England, autumn of 2006. A family walks along the dock in front of the Maritime Museum, and the salty air carries a metallic scent that seems to open an ancient door in memory. The 4-year-old boy is named Leo, and his way of observing the world astonishes with precise attention to small details. That day, he enters with his parents into a room where a dark hull fragment, salvaged from the seabed, is displayed as a testament to an interrupted journey. Leo's silence shifts in texture before the riveted surface, and his breathing slows, as if he hears something only he recognizes in the depths of steel and water, beyond the cold echo of time. The museum guide explains routes that connected cities, celebrated embarkations with music and promises of a new life across the ocean, and describes the maiden voyage of a massive ship that sets sail with confidence. Leo listens in silence and directs his gaze to the lowest level of the model, where third-class compartments appear as a maze of metal bunks and narrow corridors. He approaches the touchscreen panel and points to a specific section of the layout, right where a corridor leads to a descending staircase, as if he knew the path with his eyes closed. Elena and Daniel exchange a brief glance. Astonishment does not turn into alarm, but it fills with questions the space once occupied by curiosity. That afternoon in the hotel room, Elena writes to preserve the sequence of gestures that transformed a family outing into something different. She notes the approximate time, the order of the rooms, the position of the fragment, and the way Leo paused before the third-class panel. During dinner, the boy remains quiet and attentive to the rhythm of the room, as if listening to a beat behind the noise. Back at the hotel, he sits on the floor with a notebook and draws a corridor with opposing doors, a round lamp in the center, and a sign with an arrow on a light-colored wall. His strokes are not masterful, but they reveal memory. They seem drawn by someone who has walked that corridor many times. The next day, they return to the museum during a quiet period. The receptionist directs them to a room with disassemblable models, showing the ship's different levels. Leo points without hesitation to the stern area designated for third class and then to the access to the engine rooms, as if the distance between them could be navigated with eyes closed. He describes in simple words a low sound, not the roar of the sea but the pulse of machines ordering shifts, steps, and rest. A scaled recreation allows entry into a narrow corridor. The boy stops at the point where two corridors intersect and places his hand on the right wall, as if recalling that a lamp hung there. In a display case under controlled light rest dented spoons, plates with chipped edges, a plain cap without insignia, and blackened buckles. Victor, responsible for collections, explains their origins and materials, recounting how water transforms the texture of everything it touches over years. Leo fixes his gaze on a heavy spoon and states that third-class cutlery was rougher than that on the upper decks, and that coffee was served watery when the sea was rough. Then he brings his hand close to the glass in front of a repaired lifebelt and says that some boats drifted away with empty spaces, while others stayed by the rail waiting for orders that were slow to arrive, and no one knows why those moments lingered so long. That night, Leo's sleep brings images that do not belong to a child his age. He sits up with a racing pulse, covers his chest with his hands as if protecting an invisible garment, and utters a sequence of sounds that Elena cannot reconstruct. At dawn, he asks for paper and draws a belt with a metal buckle, worn shoes, a small suitcase, and a ticket with dense lettering. He explains that some corridors smelled of coal, and that heavy doors closed when the ship gained speed to maintain the journey's order. He adds that the water was not just a surface but a presence that vibrated against the hull from within, like a distant drum that never stopped marking time. To avoid feeding a rigid narrative, Elena decides to consult a naval historian named Anna, who works with emigration documents and survivor accounts. Anna listens calmly, insists on separating spontaneous memory from suggestion, and proposes comparing what the boy recalls with verifiable sources. She opens a layout of third-class cabin distribution and places it on the table with the patience of someone avoiding hasty conclusions. Elena has chosen not to use numbers in front of her son, yet she hears Leo recite a sequence of letters and positions as if recalling an old address. The historian pauses the consultation to preserve the balance between curiosity and method, suggesting a return to review lists and manuals under proper lighting. That night, Leo sleeps with the light on at his own request. There is no caprice in the request, there is a need for full clarity. In the middle of the night, he sits up, places his feet on the floor, and remains seated with a straight back, as if awaiting an order. Elena senses in the air a faint smell of iron and persistent damp cloth. The boy explains that the men at the boiler spoke little, and that the heat made them sweat even on the lower deck, while the hull's vibration set the rhythm for all. He then adds that a loud noise did not seem serious at first, and everything changed when the floor tilted, and the air stopped smelling of coal and began to smell of cold. Anna receives the family in a quiet consultation room, where the ship's plans rest on large tables protected by transparent sheets. She calmly explains that she will compare each detail described by the boy with service manuals and space distribution diagrams. She begins with third class and the access to the engine rooms, pointing to a narrow corridor leading to an internal staircase with painted metal railings. Elena observes how the researcher marks with paper strips the points that align with the drawings from the previous night, while Victor retrieves images of lifeboats at different loading stages, with notes on time, wind, and visibility. Leo, without touching the documents, keeps his gaze fixed on the corridor section he remembers, pausing at the intersection where the plan suggests a ceiling lamp with an opaque shade. When the consultation seems to exhaust obvious coincidences, Anna adopts a less evident method. She asks Victor for photographs of lesser documented places, such as service rooms, luggage areas, and staircase sections that people rarely photograph. She shows the family a faded image of a narrow corner where the wall displays a vertical riveted metal seam next to a sign with an arrow. The boy leans slightly toward the image, and Elena notices that his breathing aligns with the exact rhythm he adopted in front of the hull display case. Anna offers no conclusions but records the reaction in a note about non-induced associative memory, a discreet way of noting that the gesture emerged without guidance. The afternoon progresses with a slow analysis of crew testimonies, describing simultaneous orders that did not always reach the lower levels clearly. Victor, with respect for the sources, summarizes that some boats left with empty seats while other sectors awaited delayed instructions. Elena listens to this summary and recalls the previous day's phrase about boats that drifted away without full capacity. She does not allow herself to celebrate coincidences. She prefers to place each fact on a scale where method weighs as much as astonishment. Anna suggests pausing the review to avoid tiring the child and to preserve the spontaneity of his evocations, scheduling a new session for the next day dedicated to everyday objects that might trigger sensory recognition. That night, Leo's sleep brings no tears. Instead, there is a restless calm, as if the body has found a familiar posture. At dawn, he asks for paper and draws a staircase with worn steps, metal handrails, and a sign with dense lettering. He adds a service door with external hinges and a simple latch, marking with a dot the spot where he remembers a lock that vibrated when the hull trembled. Elena photographs the drawing and shows it to Anna during the first hour of consultation. The researcher compares the sketch with a technical manual describing locks and latches on interior doors in third-class circulation areas, noting a convincing similarity in the hinge shape and the sign's placement. The next step comes from the boy himself. In front of a model separating decks by levels, Leo points to the corridor he drew and the adjacent staircase, then touches with a finger the point where the plan indicates a service compartment. He describes briefly and without drama a sharp blow in the night that did not sound like thunder but like a long scrape, and the subsequent sensation of tilting that was not a lurch but a slow obedience of the floor. He speaks of the cold that entered like a breathless visitor, of the smell that ceased to be coal and damp fabrics and became metal and faceless water. Anna does not interrupt with questions. She only notes specific expressions that align with technical terms used by crew members in later reports. Victor proposes cross-referencing the boy's memory with a reconstructed timeline of the crew attending boilers and bulkheads, without introducing names or numbers, only sequences of actions. The timeline shows moments when watertight doors were ordered closed and moments when third-class passengers received late or confusing instructions. Elena understands that the real story is not a list of individual errors but a sum of decisions under pressure that, on the lower levels, became rumor rather than instruction. She does not try to fit the boy's account to the timeline. She lets both streams brush against each other without forcing, like two rivers greeting without fully merging. With the museum's permission, the team takes the family to a conservation room without display cases, only work tables with gloves, lamps, and storage boxes. On a neutral cloth rest small recovered items, ceramic fragments with chipped enamel, nails bent by time's pressure, a piece of enamel plaque without lettering. Laura, the repository curator, requests silence and presents each object as if pronouncing a proper name. Leo stops in front of the blank plaque and points to the edge where traces of white paint remain. Laura explains that such a plaque could have held a notice in interior corridors. Anna notes that the boy does not seem to seek feats but recognizes textures, edges, and smells with a respect that is not taught. That afternoon, Elena thinks of the word return. She understands it not as a doctrine or a trick but as a brush, a powerful coincidence between memory and matter. While the boy sleeps with the light on, she reviews her notes and finds a serene pattern: recognition without demand, data without clamor, gestures that claim no reward. She decides the next step must honor this tone. Instead of seeking spectacular scenes, she asks Anna to focus the investigation on the small: lamps, hinges, locks, tools, simple clothing, objects that silence the myth's noise and show the daily truth of those who traveled below. The next day, Anna sets out a table with clothing reconstructed from period patterns and copies of objects common in third class. She presents a coarse fabric jacket, a belt with a heavy buckle, a cap without insignia, and thick leather shoes. Leo looks up and places an open hand on his chest, exactly where he protected something invisible the previous day. He does not ask to wear or touch anything. He only holds the posture with a calm that restores the room's gravity of a promise. Victor, who has worked with testimonies from families of those who did not return, recognizes in this gesture a language older than plans and inventories. The session concludes without proclamations. Anna drafts a sober report noting verifiable coincidences, possible sensory associations, and non-induced reactions. The provisional conclusion avoids labels and instead proposes a working question: what truth is revealed when a young child recognizes corridors, objects, and gestures of a sunken world, and why does this truth appear precisely at the intersection of a staircase plan, the edge of a blank plaque, and the memory of cold entering like a breathless visitor? Elena accepts this question as a map for the path ahead, a map that does not impose direction but teaches how to read the horizon's shape. Anna decides the next step should focus on spatial memory and unguided recognition, so she organizes a controlled visit to a full-scale replica of third-class corridors and cabins used by the museum for educational programs. Before entering, she explains to Elena and Daniel that she will not ask suggestive questions, offer multiple choice options, or record anything but spontaneous gestures and descriptions arising without pressure. The replica smells of damp wood and old paint, reproducing the faint vibration of a moving hull with a discrete system under the floor. Leo takes a few steps and stops at the intersection of two corridors, places his palm on the right wall at shoulder height, and orients his body toward a narrow staircase, as if an ancient force organizes the flow of air and silence. The researcher marks this point on a plan and writes a sober note about bodily orientation consistent with the real circulation flow on lower levels. In the next section, the replica shows 3 opposing doors and a ceiling lamp with an opaque shade, details not highlighted by signs or didactic markers. The boy tilts his head and adopts the same posture he held before the hull panel days earlier. Elena notices that the boy's breathing rhythm aligns with the floor's vibration, a low pulse not from background music, but from a hidden motor simulating the beat of machines. Leo does not ask to open doors or seek objects. He only briefly describes the sensation of heat and coarse fabric on the neck, as if a simple coat rubbed the skin in a corridor where light is never enough. Anna records the absence of theatricality and the sensory precision of this scene. The session ends without fanfare or definitive conclusions. Back in the consultation room, Anna unfolds service manuals for the crew and cross-references them with testimonies from those who worked at boilers and bulkheads. She cautiously explains that in third class, a constant hum was often heard, a mix of vibration and hot air seeping through cracks and vents, and that this acoustic climate could imprint in memory with strange clarity. Victor, responsible for collections, adds that passenger evacuation plans did not always include clear routes for lower levels, and there is evidence of corridors crowded with people waiting for precise instructions. Elena understands that the boy's memory is not organized as a spectacular story but as a set of sensory fragments that, joined with patience, form a plausible image. To distinguish memory from later learning, Anna proposes a silent test with objects not publicly displayed. Curator Laura prepares a table with damaged textile items, buckles, metal buttons, and a piece of coarse fabric with simple seams. The items have no visible labels or explanations. Leo stops before the fabric and brings his hand close without touching, as if recalling its edge against the skin. He then points to an iron buckle with corrosion marks and places his hand on his chest, at the height where a crossed strap would hold a heavy garment. Laura notes the consistency between gesture and item without adding interpretations, and stores the objects with the same delicacy with which they were presented. In the following days, the investigation shifts to emigration documents and passenger lists, without focusing on famous names. Elena clarifies that she is not seeking a specific identity for her son, but wants to understand why a 4-year-old can describe corridors, textures, and light angles so precisely. Anna reviews third-class luggage control forms, boarding sheets with marginal notes, and port office archives recording humble baggage, sometimes reduced to a small suitcase, a change of clothes, and an address written in thick ink. Paul, a linguist who collaborated on ancient onomastics in another study, offers to listen to how Leo pronounces port place names, not to force identification but to verify accent patterns and cadences typical of those who spoke in dockside neighborhoods. A gray afternoon leads the group to a dock where old warehouses retain damp bricks and iron stairs. The air carries a mix of salt, old coal, and wood that, though faint, organizes memories even for those who have not lived in a port. Leo walks beside his mother and father with focused calm. Reaching the railing overlooking the murky water, he places both hands on the cold metal and remains still for a few seconds. There is no narration or drama. There is a stillness that the researcher defines as recognition without seeking. Victor keeps his distance. Laura observes the water's color with a seriousness that does not seem scientific, and Elena understands that this silence is worth more than any brilliant answer. To prevent the case from becoming a spectacle, Anna insists on rigorously documenting each step and sharing it only with those with technical responsibility. She coordinates with a small acoustic studio to recreate the soundscape of an early-century ship, based on recordings of similar machines and technical descriptions. The test will be conducted in a neutral room, without images, at moderate volume, and without verbal cues. The playback begins with a low, steady hum, then adds rhythmic thumps and a rush of air reminiscent of an industrial bellows. Leo sits with a straight back, closes his eyes, and adopts the serene posture everyone recognizes. He describes, in the third person and with simple phrases, the difference between the sound of steady progress and the change felt when something brushes the hull side. He does not say crash or collision. He says long scrape, as if a block of ice passed its hand. The second part of the experiment adds a barely perceptible floor tilt, simulated by a silent mechanism. The boy opens his eyes and places his hands on his thighs, anchoring his body naturally. He comments, without drama, that this sensation is not a fall but the floor's obedience to one side, and that afterward the air becomes different. Elena notes the words in cadence, understanding that her son is not so much recalling an event as reproducing a way of being in the world where the body organizes experience before the mind. Anna closes the session with a sober thank you and requests a day without activities to let everything settle. With time, the family returns to a simple routine. They stroll through parks, visit a library with a bright children's room, and eat warm bread in a discreet cafe. Even in this normalcy, small signs persist. Leo arranges his toys in parallel rows, leaving a corridor in the middle and placing a table lamp at the center, as if recreating a corridor with faint light. Elena does not correct this order, only documents it with a photograph to share with the team. Paul interprets the gesture as an intimate cartography, a way to fix a map of safety when the outside world feels too vast. The review of sources brings a modest yet revealing find. In a letter written by a crew member to their family, a moment is described when some boats left with empty spaces because a rumor spread on deck that the ship would hold, while below, instructions were delayed through stairways and corridors. The letter was neither famous nor cited in popular publications. It lived in a forgotten folder, folded in four, with damp stains in the corners. Victor reads it quietly and points out phrases where the language almost word for word matches descriptions Leo offered without knowing of the source's existence. The team allows a long silence that is not triumph but respect. To close the comparison phase, Anna organizes a final visit to the corridor replica, this time in soft twilight. She explains that there will be no artificial sounds, the floor vibration will remain off, and only one ceiling lamp will light each section. The goal is to observe whether the boy maintains the same bodily orientation without sound stimuli. Leo walks with a short, firm step, stops at the corridor intersection, places his right hand on the wall at the usual height, and looks toward the narrow staircase with a certainty that seeks no confirmation. Then, unhurried, he descends 2 steps and returns to the previous level, as if memory tests a route to store the map again. Upon leaving, Elena understands that this consistency is more eloquent than any list of coincidences. The story they are writing is not about proving a theory, but honoring a form of truth that appears when the body remembers what the mind cannot yet name. The agenda leaves space for a future decision, one that will determine whether to consult families of former passengers or accept that sometimes life opens a brief window to a house that no longer exists. Anna closes her notebook, looks at the dock in the distance, and proposes a long rest, because even legitimate questions need silence to mature.